This morning, it was the publication of the latest audience figures, showing that Radio 1 has lost another 200,000 listeners to add to the 6 million the station shed last year. The really bad news, though, for the BBC is that they're not just turning off, they're turning over to new commercial outfits like Virgin 1215 and Classic FM. Commercial radio as a whole now boasts a bigger total audience in the BBC for the first time in its history, and with big profits suddenly to be made, next month sees further expansion with the launch of a third national commercial station, Talk Radio. It's already capturing headlines with its promise to introduce American-style shock jocks to Britain. So how did commercial radio, for so long the Cinderella of British broadcasting, finally get its act together? And does its success represent a continuing threat to the BBC?
It's 26 past 8.
Red light goes off, I go in. Stand by.
Hi. 95.8 Capital FM, London's #1, Tuesday, 17th of January.
I think certainly the last couple of years, radio in this country has just come of age, really. I mean, it's becoming like a soap opera. I mean, some of the sort of headlines about, well, us and certainly like Virgin and Radio 1, I mean, it's become like the stuff of life now.
10 years ago, radio's image was comparable to that of the corner shop. I think now it's seen as a glamorous national advertising medium that is by no means a poor relation to television.
I think that the reason that the radio world is fizzing up is that you really can't put big new players like Lord Hanson and Richard Branson and lots of new capital into a market and expect everything to stay the same as it always was.
How long's the intro on this? Who cares? We're playing you only the hottest new songs, and we got this one out for you. It's called A Change by the Lightning Seeds.
Live at lunchtime.
Are you hungry for Lisa?
Last October, for the first time, commercial radio's audiences overtook the BBC's. Most of the new listeners came from a single source, Radio 1.
It is in the absolute teeth of the competitive gale. It's right at the place where all the commercial competitors are fighting for audience share. And the audience they're fighting for is Radio 1's audience. So it was absolutely clear that we had to get stripped down for action in Radio 1. In fact, over quite a long time, the Radio 1 audiences had been gradually drifting downwards and gradually drifting older. And I think if we'd let that go on, we would have been exposed to great danger. And so we decided that it was time for a pretty radical reinvigoration, and that's what's been going on.
We're coming from a position, of course, where the BBC was the only radio supplier. So the start point in this competition is BBC 100%, commercial radio nil. We've now moved, after 21 years, to a 50-50 situation, where in the last survey, commercial radio overtook the BBC. Now, a part of that process has been the preparation within the BBC for the Charter Review. And to my mind, they had absolutely no option but to reinvent Radio 1 in the way that it was reinvented.
It is true that there were many in the BBC who felt that had the Thatcher government continued, then Radio 1 would be a candidate for privatisation. And don't forget that in 1986, the Peacock Committee actually recommended privatising both Radio 1 and Radio 2. So the loss of audience is something that Radio 1 in particular regarded as a price worth paying for repositioning itself and becoming different and distinctive. The trouble is, Radio 1 did all these things very, very quickly.
I don't think there was any alternative unless the BBC was prepared to see Radio 1 privatised. Because otherwise, previously, Radio 1 was doing exactly what the commercial sector was doing. There was no argument for it to take licence payers' money.
Whatever the reasons for the audience shift, the effect on commercial radio has been dramatic. 6 million new listeners in just 2 years. But the latest figures released yesterday show that Radio 1's decline has slowed down.
What I said when I took over Radio 1 and began making changes to it was that it would take about a year for Radio 1's audience to stabilise. And I think we've seen in the latest audience figures that have been published very strong signs of that happening. Just a small loss of audience quarter on quarter at a time when there are 150 approximately commercial radio services up and down the land competing in different ways with the BBC, and it's become much more difficult to work out how audiences will flow from one to the other. And there are a number of factors which influence people's behaviour, and one of those is that commercial radio has been becoming more and more profitable and therefore able to spend more money on marketing.
You can't be too careful when you got this much dosh in your briefcase. Tune in to 95.8 Capital FM. But you're talking about very serious business. I mean, I think it used to be a bit of a gentleman's club and people used to amble in and sort of put nice little tunes on, more or less whatever they fancy. And it's become terribly serious now. I mean, the profits involved in the commercial side of it are, you know, as much as an awful lot, or more than an awful lot of television stations. I mean, talking about Capital Radio declared £22.9 million last year. I mean, that is serious money.
A key element in the revival of commercial radio has been the launch of national stations.
Good afternoon, Virgin. Can I help you?
Virgin 1215 providing rock music for 20 to 44-year-olds.
On Saturday, but there's ballet there this evening.
And Classic FM playing light classical music for upmarket audiences.
And South Walsham in Norfolk.
This is Longwave Radio, Atlantic 252.
From a country house near Dublin, a third unofficial national station, Atlantic 252, avoids British broadcasting restrictions and plays carefully selected pop music across the UK.
20 to 1, Nirvana unplugged in New York at 20.
And February the 14th will see the launch of Talk Radio UK, a 24-hour national talk station.
Good afternoon, Talk Radio UK.
Most advertising agencies would say that radio is definitely the glamour medium of the moment. That's really only happened in the last 2 years, and I think there are a number of reasons for its sudden, meteoric rise in advertising share. The first of those reasons would be the arrival of the new network commercial radio stations, particularly Classic FM.
The one that caught everybody napping actually was Classic, because nobody really expected sort of Henry Kelly and a few bits of Chopin to actually do very well. And it did far better than anybody expected.
The success of Classic FM had an impact that was really very widely felt, and one of the reasons for that was the fact that our success was a surprise. That caused people to reassess the medium. It slightly disturbed preconception about radio.
Classic FM, delivered fresh every morning.
For about 2 decades, radio languished really at the bottom of the rankings in terms of the share it took of advertising. It was always about 2%. What we've seen in the last 2 years is radio doubling that share of revenue to about 4%. If you look at other European markets, you will see radio taking up to 10% of all advertising. I see no reason why radio won't continue this extraordinary rate of growth. As long as the audiences continue to tune in more and more, then advertising revenue will grow.
The roads around there is all flooded. In Devon, there's some flooding.
With its confidence renewed, the commercial radio industry is promoting itself with an aggressive national advertising campaign which started last week.
Now then, you're right, Billboard here, and these lads what work in advertising with their ponytails and their day-glow glasses, they can make us buy out we don't want, can't they? They don't put their brass just anywhere, but on a winner. So when I tell you that in 1993, money spent on advertising grew by 4%, but money spent on advertising on commercial radio grew by 24%, that's 6 times as much. And in 1994, the growth accelerated. What does that tell you?
That sort of an improvement in percentage terms represents potentially over £100 million of cash coming into the industry. And with that sort of potential opportunity being available, clearly it's commercially very attractive. The national stations have provided advertisers with the opportunity of buying one product across the whole country, a lot of listeners in one go, and also they buy the stations from just one point. You know, you just talk to one station to buy however many million listeners across the whole of the UK. And it's also attractive from a listener's point of view. I mean, from, you know, Atlantic's field here in Ireland, we're able to broadcast right the way across the UK, and all the other stations, Classic, Virgin and Talk, when they come on, also provide a service which listeners can travel all around the country and still listen to.
In the past, the commercial radio industry had dozens of small players, with each local radio station being owned by a different company. But the 1990 Broadcasting Act loosened up ownership rules.
Since 1990, there has been a considerable consolidation in the industry, and what was a very fragmented industry in terms of ownership has become much more coherent. There's been the creation of a number of coherent radio groups, which I see as being so crucial a part of continuing success. And it's interesting to note that